My name is Grace Hemsworth. I'm 34 years old and I never imagined my own body would turn against me in the one place I thought I was safe. I woke up on my old bed, unable to lift a finger. My eyes were open, my mind fully awake, but every muscle felt locked in place like someone had poured cement into my veins. I tried to swallow, to breathe deeper, to move even a single toe. Nothing happened. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, familiar. The door to my room wasn't fully closed. It was left open just enough for a sliver of light to cut across the floor. I couldn't turn my head toward it, but I could hear her voice, low, controlled, and terrifyingly calm, saying, "Just make it look natural." A silhouette shifted. Someone else stepped inside. Heavy boots, colder breathing. A man I had never seen before walked up to my bed and leaned over me like he was checking if I had already slipped away. Two fingers pressed against my neck. He waited, then muttered under his breath, "She's still aware. This wasn't supposed to happen yet." My heart hammered so violently it hurt. I couldn't blink, couldn't signal, could only listen as he stood over me deciding what to do next. Before leaving, he whispered something that cut through every ounce of strength I had left. "She won't remember any of this." In that moment, I realized what I never wanted to believe. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted me like this, powerless and silent. Before I tell you what happened next and who walked through that door, make sure you're subscribed, hit the like button, and tell me in the comments, have you ever trusted someone who ended up being the real danger? 2 weeks earlier, my life in Denver was running on the kind of predictable rhythm I had built for myself over the years. I worked long hours at the firm, cooked simple dinners in my quiet apartment, and tried to keep my world small and manageable. I liked order. I liked having control over my own decisions. That morning, I was reviewing a quarterly report when an automated alert from my bank flashed across my phone. It mentioned a deposit I didn't recognize tied to a project I had never handled. The amount wasn't enormous, but it was unusual enough to make me pause. I checked again, scrolling through the transaction history looking for anything that connected to it, but nothing made sense. My first instinct was to call the bank, but a meeting reminder popped up, and I pushed the thought aside, assuming I'd get to it later. I never did. In the middle of that same afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was my mom, Marilyn Hemsworth. Her voice sounded tired, stretched thin, like she was trying to stay composed. She told me she had just come home from shoulder surgery and needed help around the house for a couple of weeks. She didn't ask directly. She never did. But the strain in her voice made the request clear. I told her I'd come. I used my remaining vacation days, packed up what I needed, and drove 14 hours straight to Bend, Oregon. When I finally pulled into their driveway, the house looked exactly as it had when I left for college, but walking through the front door felt different. My father, Douglas Hemsworth, wasn't someone I saw often. We kept contact polite and shallow, but when he greeted me, something felt off. He hugged me, quickly stepped back, and immediately asked about my job, my salary, and whether I had changed banks recently. It wasn't small talk. His questions were sharp, targeted, probing. I brushed them off, blaming fatigue from the drive, but the shift in his tone sat heavy in my chest. My mom was in the living room, arm in a sling, trying to pretend she felt better than she looked. I helped her sit upright, fetched her medication, and started sorting the kitchen laundry and errands before she even had to ask. A few hours later, the front door swung open and my sister walked in like she owned the place. Harper Hemsworth, the older sister everyone admired without knowing why, breezed into the room wearing full makeup and carrying a ring light in her bag. She kissed Mom on the cheek, hugged Dad dramatically, and greeted me last, with a tone that was a little too bright to be sincere. Within minutes, she had her phone out asking Mom to pose, while she recorded a short clip about supporting family during recovery. She stayed long enough to set up the shot, fix the lighting record 3 takes, and post it with a caption that made her look like she had been caring for Mom all week. When she was satisfied with the engagement on her post, she packed up and said she had errands to run. She didn't offer to help with dinner, didn't ask how I had been, and didn't look at Mom long enough to notice the discomfort on her face. I told myself none of it mattered. I was here to help, nothing more. But something about the atmosphere in that house, about my father's questions about Harper's performance, felt like a warning I didn't yet understand. That first evening in the house moved quietly, the kind of quiet that feels like everyone is pretending things are normal. My mom had fallen asleep on the couch, so I helped her settle into her room before starting on dinner. Her medication schedule was taped to the fridge, already outdated, so I rewrote it and set alarms on my phone to keep everything on track. While I cooked, I could hear my sister in the hallway. Harper Hemsworth was adjusting a tripod and checking angles on her phone, trying to capture the perfect shot for another post. She wasn't talking to Mom or asking if she needed anything. She was rehearsing lines about family support and recovery, pausing only to reapply lip gloss between takes. When dinner was almost ready, my father appeared in the doorway. Douglas Hemsworth didn't comment on the food or on how much there was to do. Instead, he leaned against the counter and asked how my job was going. Before I could answer, he shifted to questions about whether I had changed banks recently, if I had updated my Social Security information, and when I had last filed certain forms. The way he asked, calm but pointed, made something tense coil in my stomach. I kept my responses short, pretending not to notice the direction of his curiosity. Later, after the kitchen was cleaned and my parents were settled for the night, I went to the room I used to share with stacks of school projects and thrift store furniture. It felt smaller than I remembered. I opened my suitcase, sorted my clothes, and reached under the bed to grab an old storage box I thought might still be there. Instead, my hand brushed against the corner of something thin and papery. I pulled it out. It was a plain manila envelope, sealed but dusty, wedged far back, where no one would casually leave something important. My first thought was that it belonged to Dad. He had always used that kind of envelope. My name was written on the front, Grace Hemsworth, but not in my handwriting. Inside were loan documents from a local credit union, all dated within the past 2 years, all listing me as the borrower. The signature at the bottom looked like mine at first glance, but the slant was off, the pressure wrong, the loops tighter than anything I would ever write. The address wasn't my Denver apartment. It was this house, my father's house. My chest tightened. I read every page twice, then a third time, hoping the words might shift into something rational. They didn't. I walked to my mom's room and knocked softly. She stirred but didn't fully sit up. I asked her if she knew anything about the loan or why there were documents with my name hidden under the bed. She blinked twice and shook her head quickly, avoiding my eyes. "Your father handles the paperwork," she whispered. She didn't ask to see the envelope. She didn't ask what was inside. She just pulled her blanket higher and told me she was tired. Something about her reaction, not confused, not curious, just afraid, unsettled me more than the documents themselves. When I stepped back into the hallway, Harper was waiting with a steaming cup in her hands. She smiled like she hadn't rehearsed it a dozen times before. "I made you something to help you sleep," she said. Her voice wavered just enough for me to notice. Her eyes didn't quite meet mine. I hesitated, then thanked her and took the cup. I drank it because she was my sister, and because even with the tension in the house, I didn't think she was capable of anything more than selfishness. I didn't think she could hurt me. About 30 minutes later, the room had gone dim enough that the corners blurred, and a strange heaviness settled over my legs. At first, I tried to shift my foot beneath the blanket, assuming it had fallen asleep, but nothing moved. The numbness crawled upward in slow, deliberate waves, spreading through my calves, then my thighs. I lifted my hand, or I thought I did, but it didn't respond. Panic tightened in my chest as my arms grew sluggish, the strength draining out of them until they rested uselessly at my sides. I tried to sit up, but my torso stayed fixed against the pillow, as if an invisible weight pinned me down. Within minutes, every muscle stilled, except for the frantic rhythm in my chest and the shallow rise of my breath. My eyes remained open, locked on the faint glow from the hallway. I could see, hear, feel everything, yet I couldn't move a single inch. Somewhere outside my door, footsteps paused. I heard Harper's voice, low and strangely controlled, like she was trying not to let her words shake. "Dad said she won't remember anything." The sentence hit me harder than the paralysis. Someone murmured something in response, but I couldn't make out the words. Then the doorknob clicked softly. The door didn't swing wide. Instead, it eased open to a narrow gap just enough for someone to slip in. That small, deliberate opening told me everything. Harper had done it on purpose. A man stepped inside. He wasn't anyone I recognized. He looked to be in his early 30s, clean shave, wearing a dark jacket that didn't match the casual clothes of the house. He didn't hesitate or ask if I was awake. He approached my bed with the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly why he was there. He leaned over me, 2 fingers pressing against the side of my neck. His expression shifted almost immediately. Not alarm, annoyance. "This dosage wasn't what I agreed to," he muttered, speaking more to himself than to anyone else. His voice was tense, professional, irritated. Behind him, Harper whispered sharply, "Just do what Dad asked." She didn't step into the room. She stayed at the door, her silhouette stiff like she was holding her breath. The man, who didn't yet have a name to me, checked my pulse again, then watched the rise and fall of my chest as if evaluating whether something had gone wrong or if this level of paralysis was expected. His disappointment seeped into the air. He didn't touch anything else, didn't pull out equipment, didn't make any dramatic moves. He simply observed, frowning at the result. I wanted to scream, to demand what they were doing, to tell him I was awake, aware, terrified, but my body refused to respond. The man exhaled sharply, straightened, and stepped back toward the hallway. Harper didn't say another word. She just moved aside so he could leave. As he walked out, something slipped from his jacket pocket and landed on the floor with a soft tap, a business card. No one noticed it. Not him, not Harper. But I saw it clearly from where I lay, frozen in place, unable to reach it or even tilt my head. I memorized every detail I could from that distance, clinging to it as the only thing I had control over. My heart pounded violently against the stillness of my limbs, and inside my unmoving body, panic built like pressure behind glass I couldn't break. I was fully awake, fully aware, and completely trapped inside myself. Before the sky even turned blue, a faint tremor ran through the tip of my index finger. It was so small I thought I imagined it, but then another followed, sharper this time, and I realized the sensation was pushing its way back into my body. I focused every ounce of energy on moving that single finger, then 2, then my whole hand. My arm felt heavy, but it responded. I pulled it across the mattress inch by inch until it slid off the edge. The cold floor against my knuckles helped me concentrate, helped me remember that as long as I could move, I had a chance. With slow, uneven effort, I rolled myself sideways until gravity did the rest, and I slipped off the bed, hitting the floor harder than I expected. The jolt rattled my ribs, but the shock cleared the fog in my head. My legs barely followed, dragging uselessly behind me as I pushed with my elbows toward the door. Every movement made my breath tremble, but the panic drove me faster. I reached the hallway, paused to listen, and heard nothing but the hum of the heater. My parents' door was shut. Harper's room was silent. I kept crawling, gripping the carpet fibers, pulling myself toward the stairs. Going down was nearly impossible. My body folded and twisted awkwardly, but I made it to the bottom without making enough noise to wake anyone. The front door felt miles away, yet when I finally reached it and pushed, the latch clicked softly and a wave of cold air swept inside. I slipped out, letting the door rest against the frame without fully shutting it, then dragged myself to my car. Sitting up took everything I had left. Turning the key took even more. By the time the engine started, full control of my arms had returned, and my legs began to tingle with painful pins and needles. I drove without looking back. At the first rest stop off the highway, I parked and forced my shaking legs to carry me to the row of old payphones near the vending machines. The business card I had memorized the night before flashed through my mind, each number etched into it as clearly as the fear in my chest. I dialed with stiff fingers. The call connected on the third ring. Hello. The voice was crisp, alert. I swallowed hard. Is this Colin Mercer? There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. Grace. He sounded stunned, like my name wasn't supposed to come from my own mouth. You can talk? My throat tightened. I need to see you. Now. We agreed on a meetup point, a nearly empty parking lot behind a convenience store a few exits north. When I pulled in, morning light was barely creeping over the mountains. A dark sedan rolled up minutes later. The man who stepped out was the same one from my room. He looked different now, less certain, more conflicted. You weren't supposed to be conscious, he said quietly. Or able to move. My stomach nodded. Then started explaining. Colin rubbed a hand over his jaw, glancing around as if checking for witnesses. Your father hired me months ago. He told me you were unstable, that you made impulsive decisions, that you were losing track of reality. He asked me to evaluate you, gather information, verify whether a conservatorship would be justified. My pulse hammered. A conservatorship. He nodded. Complete control. Your finances, your decisions, everything. His voice tightened. But the documents he provided, loan records, income statements, flagged transactions, they didn't match public data. They looked manufactured. My breath caught. So why go along with it? He exhaled slowly. Because the inconsistencies were too big. I needed to understand what was really happening. And I needed you to know what you're up against. By the following afternoon, I was back in Denver, with one goal in mind: find every document that actually belonged to me. My legs were still weak, but I moved through my apartment with a clarity I hadn't felt in days. I opened my bedroom closet, reached behind a stack of old folders, and pulled out the small metal box my grandmother Irene Turner had given me 12 years earlier. She had pressed it into my hands the night before she passed away, her voice soft but firm as she said, "Someday, you'll need this more than you know." At the time, I thought it was nothing more than a sentimental keepsake. Now I knew better. I set the box on my kitchen counter, slid the latch open, and lifted the lid. Inside was a folded letter, a sealed document, and a narrow brass key taped to the bottom. The letter was on top, her handwriting, unmistakable, slanted, steady, and written in ink that had faded only slightly. Grace, it began. If you're reading this, it means the truth finally found you. Your father has taken from this family more times than any of us could count. I cannot stop him now, but I can make sure he doesn't take what is meant to be yours. My pulse quickened. I unfolded the sealed document and felt my breath catch. It was her will, official, notarized, and stating clearly that her cabin in Montana was left to me alone. I traced my name on the page, stunned. I had never heard a single word about a cabin, let alone inherited it. Before I could process what it meant, Colin Mercer stepped closer beside me. He had come straight to Denver after leaving Bend, insisting that anything we discovered next needed to be verified immediately. He scanned the will, then opened a file on his tablet, his expression tightening. "Grace, there's something you need to see." He rotated the screen toward me. A deed transfer and mortgage agreement appeared, dated 3 years earlier. The borrower's name was mine. My stomach twisted. "Colin, I've never even been to Montana. There's no way I signed that." "I know," he said quietly. "And that's why this fits the pattern. Your father sold the cabin using a loan issued under your identity. The signature looks like yours at first glance, but the strokes are wrong. It's a forgery, but one sophisticated enough that most clerks wouldn't think twice." A cold, nauseating wave crept through me. Douglas hadn't just fabricated a few financial documents, he had erased an entire inheritance that legally belonged to me, then funneled the money into an account only he controlled. Colin continued, his voice low. This wasn't an isolated case. The withdrawals from your parents' accounts, the fake address tied to your name, the fabricated income, all of it connects. He's been building this framework for years, waiting for the moment he could claim you were incapable of handling your own finances. The cabin was simply the largest piece he could liquidate. I sank into a chair, not from shock, but from the weight of clarity. Every inconsistency, every strange question, every odd reaction from Douglas now sat in a straight line. But what cut deeper than anything was the next thought that formed in my mind. Harper. She had moved through our childhood believing Dad's version of everything, believing I was unstable, irresponsible, selfish. She had repeated his words as if they were truth because they were all she had ever heard. I exhaled slowly. She didn't know. She really thought she was protecting our family. The realization didn't excuse her choices, but it reframed them. Harper hadn't been plotting against me. She had been shaped piece by piece into someone who trusted the wrong person. And for the first time, I understood just how deep my father's manipulation truly went. The morning of the hearing arrived with a stillness that felt almost deliberate, as if the city itself sensed what was about to unfold. Rachel Nguyen walked beside me through the courthouse hallway with calm confidence, her case file tucked under her arm. She had spent the past 48 hours dissecting every document, recording, and signature, preparing for a confrontation my father never imagined I would survive, much less attend. When the courtroom doors opened, I saw him seated at the petitioner's table, Douglas Turner, composed and smug, his expression carrying the assumption that I was still incapacitated somewhere, conveniently unable to respond to the conservatorship he had filed. The moment he saw me walking in, his jaw locked, and a sharp, involuntary blink betrayed his shock. Judge Fellman entered, called the session to order, and allowed Rachel to begin. She approached the bench with measured clarity, placing the original will from my grandmother before the court. This is the authentic, notarized document left to my client, she stated. Its contents contradict the property transfers Mr. Turner executed, using forged loan agreements under Grace Turner's name. The judge examined it carefully. Rachel then displayed the falsified mortgage package, along with the handwriting analyst's report, concluding the signatures attributed to me were fabricated. Next came the audio file, Douglas speaking clearly to an associate, discussing how a temporary medication-induced impairment would smooth the process of gaining control over my finances. The courtroom fell silent. The judge asked Douglas to respond, but his explanation unraveled instantly, slipping from denial to justification to indignation, each attempt weaker than the last. When Rachel outlined the financial trail showing funds diverted into an account solely under his control, the judge leaned back, expression firm. The petition for conservatorship is denied, he declared. Furthermore, this court authorizes a full investigation into Mr. Turner's financial conduct, including potential fraud and identity misuse. The gavel struck, sealing the decision. As people began to stand, Douglas stared at me with a mixture of fury and disbelief, as if the world had betrayed him instead of the other way around. Later that evening, I returned to the house where everything had begun. Rachel advised me not to go alone, so she waited outside while I stepped inside for what I knew was the final conversation. Douglas stood in the living room, stiff and cornered. "You think you've won," he muttered. "You've always exaggerated everything. Your problems, your reactions. I tried to manage what you couldn't." His voice grew harsher with each word, shifting blame with practiced ease. Harper stood behind him, her shoulders trembling. She finally whispered, "Dad, please stop." When he ignored her, she turned to me, tears streaking down her face. "I thought I was protecting us. I swear I didn't know what he was really doing." Her voice cracked under the weight of years she couldn't take back. My mother, Marilyn, appeared in the doorway, her hands clasped tightly. "Grace, I knew some things were wrong," she said quietly. "But every time I questioned him, he made me feel like I was imagining it. I was afraid of what would happen if I pushed harder." The room felt heavy, suffocating, swollen with truths no one wanted to own. I steadied myself and spoke with a calm I didn't expect. I'm done carrying the consequences of his decisions. I'm done letting fear dictate anything about my life. I looked at each of them, Harper's regretful eyes, Marilyn's defeated posture, Douglas's bitter glare. This is the last time I stand in this house. From this moment on, I'm choosing my life, not the one he tried to force on me. And with that, I walked out before any of them could answer. By the time the legal process reached its final stage, the consequences had begun folding in on themselves with a precision that felt almost clinical. Investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit interviewed Douglas Turner, repeatedly documenting every forged signature, every unauthorized loan, every inconsistency in his explanations. When the sentencing hearing arrived, he stood before the court without the confidence he once weaponized. The judge delivered a ruling that reflected both the seriousness of his actions and the pattern of manipulation he had maintained for years. He received several years of probation, mandatory financial restitution, ongoing monitoring, and strict limitations on contacting me. He was ordered to attend a rehabilitation program for compulsive fraud behavior and barred from holding any position that involved managing another person's assets. The collapse of his public persona was immediate. His colleagues distanced themselves, and organizations that once treated him as dependable cut all ties. Every fabricated story he'd woven finally had a light shone directly onto it. Harper's fall came differently, quieter, but no less severe. Her employer confronted her about the inconsistencies in her social media content and the complaint filed against her for participating in the conservatorship attempt. She was placed on administrative leave, then dismissed when the final report confirmed her involvement. She began attending counseling at the direction of her therapist, slowly piecing together the emotional conditioning she had lived under. In messages she attempted to send me messages I never opened, she wrote about her confusion, guilt, and the years she spent believing narratives fed to her by our father. Marilyn faced a reality she had avoided for decades. Without Douglas's income and without my support, she had to sign her own lease for the first time in years. She moved into a modest apartment outside Bend, forced to confront a life where dependency was no longer an option. She made several attempts to reach out, each one a brief, tentative voicemail that wavered between apology and hesitation, but I chose not to respond. My path diverged from theirs completely. I relocated to Montana, settling near the cabin my grandmother intended for me. The place had been reclaimed legally after the discovery of the fraudulent sale, and stepping onto the land felt like the first breath I'd taken without someone else's expectations pressing against my ribs. I found work with a small outdoor education program and began building a life far removed from the one defined by fear and manipulation. Colin helped me navigate the transition, not as someone trying to shape my decisions, but as someone who respected them. My circle became intentionally small, people who valued clarity, boundaries, and independence. I didn't send updates to anyone back home. I didn't check for their messages. I didn't ask mutual acquaintances how they were doing. The silence wasn't punishment. It was protection. One evening, while organizing the documents recovered from the investigation, I found my grandmother's letter again. Her words echoed with a truth I finally understood. Family is not the people who share your blood. Family is the people who honor your safety, your dignity, and your truth. For the first time, that sentence didn't hurt. It made sense. My story wasn't about repairing what had been broken. It was about recognizing what was never whole to begin with. And the lesson I carried forward was, simple boundaries are not walls. They are doors you close to keep your soul intact. Some families are not safe. Some attachments are not worth preserving. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away without looking back.